We're back with another episode of the One Pour Problems podcast, and today I am joined by Brent Robertson, founder of Be Generative. Super excited to have you on the show today. Really excited about the conversation we're going to have.
Glad to be here and glad to have a nice, beautiful glass of bourbon sitting next to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly what I want to start with, is tell me a little bit about why Old Forester bourbon in particular is so significant for you.
It wasn't. It was sort of a known label that you would see on the shelf, often in the back of the cabinet somewhere. Mm-hmm. I remember when I first got my first whiff of bourbon, my dad would occasionally have a glass of Jack Daniels. And yeah, not a great place to start with. But, hey,
it's where most start.
And over my life, I started to grow an appreciation for just the sophistication of bourbon and Scotch. And then recently, my wife and I had a chance to do a tour of Louisville, which of course is the holy grail of bourbon making for so many reasons. Fascinating facts about that place, even the way the water leaches through the particular stone and the white oak that grows natively in that area offer conditions unlike any place else in the world for bourbon making. And we got a chance to tour a couple of the distilleries. But it was an evening that we had gone out for dinner and met, her name was Andromeda, this barkeep, and she put us through a tour of bourbons that included several different Old Foresters. That's cool. And sort of curated the whole thing. Mm-hmm. And ever since that day, Old Forester's become my default.
Yeah.
Which has been, it's amazing. Of course, the bottle that you chose, which I'm really grateful for, is one that I literally just picked up this very bottle this week as well. I think it just came out.
Yeah. So I love the story because that's exactly like how I love to share the bourbon journey with people, is it's an experience and you start to learn a lot of different things, and I think it ties so well into leadership and talking about all of these experiences that people have had. That's really the premise of why we started the podcast, was I love to have these conversations over drinks, because there's always a story behind the drinks and there's always a story behind everyone's leadership journey. And yours in particular, you have quite the impressive background, right? So 25 years of experience as an entrepreneur. You're a coach, a facilitator. You've done a TEDx talk, and so tell us a little bit about who you are and what led you to where you are today.
Sure. It's funny. One of the things I get in front of rooms of leaders on a regular basis, tens of thousands all over North America, and one of the things that I encourage is to take the time to get into meaningful discourse with other people around you. We've created a world where we are so filled up, every nook and cranny of our lives is busy with something, and even when we have downtime, we typically are consuming pixels of some kind. And what gets missed is time like this to sit with a friend and actually talk about what matters. And so I encourage those that I work with to say, hey, you know what, why not this Friday night be the night that you actually light the campfire in the backyard and invite over a good friend and have a favorite beverage and just sit and talk and just wonder about the world and why we're in it and what this is all about. Mm-hmm. And it's where all the life is in those conversations. And one of the things I appreciate about bourbon in particular as it relates to that is this is a slow-paced thing. You're not throwing back bourbons, you're taking sips and you're enjoying the moment and the flavors, and it just sort of creates this whole bouquet of environment that I think encourages really great conversations. So I'm excited about this one.
Yeah.
A little just sort of background that sort of led me to the work that I do in leadership is a real fascination and curiosity about where is it that we spend time that makes the difference? Or more generally, where is it that we spend time and how is it making a difference? Whether it's making no difference, making, detracting from our efforts, or in particular, what I'm after is where if we apply even a small amount of energy causes a force multiplying effect. That just our presence, our state of being, or the conversation that we're having has a massive upside on the other side of that conversation. And that's what led to really one of the primary programs that we teach at Be Generative is the leverage that we have in our listening and the fact that we're really not using it.
And so tell me about that, right? So, we talk about active listening a lot, right? That's like the baseline. And then now, the generative listening. Like, so I know your TEDx was specifically on that. And so I think that's a big part of like what you're teaching and trying to have other people understand. So, tell our listeners a little bit about what that exactly is.
Well, so it's interesting. There is, if you look at through all the ages and writings through the millennia about the characteristics of great leadership, listening is always in the top 5 and has been forever. And yet the common approach or the way that we are taught listening, if at all, is fairly primitive. It speaks mostly about listening has to do with skills. If I accumulate a bunch of skills around listening, then that makes me a good listener. And that skills are certainly useful, like active listening, but it doesn't actually answer the fundamental question. Why am I listening and what's its purpose? And a skills-based approach to listening is a very limited view because, active listening, you hear that one all the time. Like, what does that actually mean? I'm like, ooh, I'm active in the listening, like physically active, what's going on? It has to do with certainly wanting to be present and engaged in the conversation, but it actually doesn't address where our listening gets very limited, where even if we're actively listening, we tend to listen in this very small space. And that space typically is shaped by listening for what fits our experience or worldview, unable to listen to what doesn't fit our experience or worldview. We tend to automatically listen for what is and what's been. That's where we go by default toward the past. And so there's this temporality of listening, which means we can move in time where we're listening. We tend to always be in that place of, what's right in front of us that we're addressing and what experiences in the past could we use to address those things. And what we miss is listening future. What's the possibility we're actually trying to create? And when we listen for future, what we're actually doing is we're opening up the space between what is and what's possible. And when we do even that, sort of shift our listening in time, it opens up this field that allows us to have much more thoughtful conversations about the actions we're doing in the moment. So, for example, organizations tend to spend, I know this to be true, it's a fact, 90% of the conversations inside of any business have to do with fixing problems. And when we hear things as a problem, that's a judgment word. And the only place judgment words come from is our experience of the past. Does it fit, match it, or not? And if it doesn't, let's say it's discongruent with our past experience, we tend to call it a problem. When we have the future in mind, it allows us to be more discerning, to say, okay, of all the things that are true in this moment, we can pick and choose the handful of things that if we put our attention on actually matter to our future. Instead of trying to whack-a-mole our way through all of these problems when, 90% of them have nothing to do with our future. I see organizations all the time spend countless energy, even driving themselves to the point of oblivion, fixing problems that frankly don't matter. But because they show up as a problem, it triggers a lot of sort of the hero leadership mindset, which is, let's go run around and fix that problem. We feel really good about fixing that problem, and everyone celebrates when we fix that problem. And yet when you look at it, okay, so now it's fixed, is it making any difference? And does that difference have anything to do with our future? In the absence of having the future present in the conversation, what ideally are we trying to accomplish? What's the vision we have? It makes it really impossible to be discerning. And so we end up in that echo chamber of just looking for problems, fixing the problems, and then, of course, we all know the world's just going to continue to throw problems our way because the future is pretty a generous place and will always throw things at us to keep us busy fixing things, and we could spend all our time there. So this concept of generative listening really helps to understand this important idea, which is, what if listening were our ability to create space? And inside of that space, so think of your listening as you extend it out, opens up a void. Inside of that void, then new ideas, futures, and even people can come into existence inside of. But when we're using this automatic listening, which is we're listening for only what fits our experience of the past, we miss out on all these other dimensions that we have access to with the human beings around us, which really is actually having leaders inadvertently squandering the intelligence of the teams that they have. And we leave all of this capacity off the table because we're stuck in this echo chamber of a conversation about what is, what's been, what fits, what's working, what's not working. Those things are contained in that conversation. We miss out on all these other beautiful things.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting because I think it ties into a few different places where I've had this conversation in the past, right? And a few leaders that I've talked to and been on the show, we all subscribe to like the EOS model, right? And EOS is like, it's funny because it's talking about the future, where you want to go, but then you spend most of your time tackling issues, right? So like problems you're trying to solve, not what are we doing to go actually attack the future of what's possible.
Yes.
And so I'm assuming you've come across that conversation before, like, how do you combat that framework where you're like, hey, EOS is a good framework because it helps you with understanding the structure of your business and your goals and the things that you're trying to break down, and even to like meeting structure. But as far as like how you deploy generative listening so you can actually think about solving less issues and problems on a day-to-day, and really spending more time talking about what's possible and where can we go, and growth opportunities.
So coincidentally, and very intentionally, a member of our team is a very accomplished EOS integrator, Stephanie. And her biggest challenge when she's working with her clients is, look, I'm going to help create this framework that's going to allow you to make focused and aggressive progress on whatever it is you put your attention on. And yet, they're not thinking big enough about the future possibility that they seek. And so they're playing a smaller game than they could be using these tools that allow you to play the game really, really well. And one of the things that gets in the way of what you're talking about, there's a couple of things. One is, and the basis of all of our work is really challenging the underlying assumptions behind what we believe leadership to be. And one of the things that gets in the way is that we believe, and we're being misled to believe this to be true, is to be able to declare what I want in the future. To say it means I need to know how to do it. And I can't say what I want unless I know how to do it. And that is a very limited view, because if you already know how to do it, all you're actually doing is sort of extrapolating the past forward. What if instead we freed ourselves from worrying about needing to know how to do it, then say what we actually want? The fun is in building the strategy to do what has never been done before. And this is where we run into sort of another primary limit to our listening that, if we encourage, makes all the difference. Again, we tend to listen to what are the issues we need to fix. Sometimes, but not nearly enough, we spend time talking about appreciating what's actually working. For any business to be operating at any level of performance, a great deal needs to be working for that to be true. Do we even acknowledge and talk about what's working? Because if we don't actually appreciate what's working, we don't care for those things. And then all of a sudden, through times of growth, we run off the rails and wonder what happened. Well, we forgot to pay a careful attention, like, for example, culture. There's certain attributes to culture that, if carefully cared for, allow the water of our organizations to be really, really healthy. But if we're not appreciating and paying attention to those things, the culture erodes in the favor of aggressive action, and then all of a sudden people are infighting and silos are going on, and we're all scratching our heads going, well, what the heck happened? We forgot to take care of the condition of the water we're in. So that's one. So let's just say you look at it in 3 conversations. The one we're most familiar with is what's not working that needs to be fixed. What if we also talked about what is working that we need to continue to have working, if not get better at, to get us to the future? And then the one that gets missed almost all the time, and this is where the real creative enterprise of leadership comes to life, is what's missing. What isn't yet here that if we created, capacity that we built, head count that we acquired, what's missing that isn't yet here that if we created would make the difference? And that's where we move into what I find one of the most fulfilling experiences of leadership, which is the creative aspect of using our imaginations to think about, well, what isn't yet present that if were would make a difference? Another question I love that encourage leaders to ask is, what's here that we're not talking about and probably should be? Right? What's actually going on that no one's speaking to because they're afraid to state the obvious or point out the elephant in the airplane?
No, so I love the idea of like asking the questions of things that you don't know are possible yet, because in our business, right, so we're on the IT side. I make the comment pretty often, like anybody can do IT, right? Like at this point, like there's AI that's starting to do a bunch of like help desk level things and that kind of stuff. And so, the magic of doing IT services is really now more of a commodity unless you're looking for a specific level of service. The flip side, though, of like where I feel our business needs to continue to go is work on more business enablement and talking to our clients and our prospective clients of like, I generally ask this question. I say, I don't want you to tell me exactly what needs to be done. I want you to tell me it would be really cool if I didn't have to do this anymore, or I could do this and then this happens. And you're like, awesome, that is what I need, because I think a lot of organizations rely on people like us to be able to tell them exactly how the things should function and work. And we're not in their seat. We don't see what they do on a day-to-day. We need them to explain what that experience is like and how they do what they do, to then say, it would be really cool if I didn't have to enter this data 3 different times. There'd be a cool way to be able to integrate them all. And so I love that from the perspective of like really pushing people to say like what's possible outside of what right, from past experiences.
Well, it's important to even understand the heritage of the IT industry altogether. Several of my clients are in this space, and the heritage of the industry is that IT really came from sort of a maintenance field, which was, okay, now we have this technology on board and it's about maintaining its continuous operation. And so what that means is, from the eyes of executives, IT was thought of as an expense. And when we think of something as an expense, then we automatically look to minimize the expense. Right? And so the break fix, these are language of the IT space that continues that legacy of what it once was. But if you shift it, and I'll never forget, this is with one of my clients, a 107-year-old logistics company. And 5 years ago, we did a huge visioning exercise. And one of the elements of the vision is that IT went from a maintenance service area to a business enabler.
Love it.
And in the course of those 5 years, the entire organization has been really revolutionized through that mindset. So now what they look at it is IT is an investment to maximize, not an expense to minimize. Changes the whole thing. And so now you look at it from the standpoint of the production of ROI, as opposed to the minimization of maintenance expenses. And for those in the industry that really take on that mindset and say, Yeah, okay, great. The continuity of your current infrastructure, great, we've got that one. And that's the part that, a lot of commoditization and automation, those things are coming into play. Mm-hmm. The other side of it is, okay, how can we enable things within your organization you couldn't possibly do before? And they certainly could be efficiency gains, right? Which is like duplicity of, language twisted here, maybe drinking bourbon, duplicity of activities, data entry, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And how do we make those more efficient? Those are great. Those are incremental improvement things. But how do we use technology for breakthrough? Mm-hmm. Radically new ways of looking at contracting, right? How do we actually analyze the process of contracting and come to better and more thoughtful contracting, right? With AI, it's incredible how we can be much more proactive about not only analysis of data, but generating much more thoughtful ways in which to engage strategically with our clients, even based on, how much is it going to cost for a service first? What's it worth if we were to enable this functionality inside of your organization? Now, all of a sudden, we go past the hourly rate contract and we move into the value-based sales and contracts. And so there's a lot of professional service firms of different kinds that have that legacy, and it's really hard to let it go. But we're at a time right now where we really have to. So technology as business and future enablement is a really powerful conversation to be having.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the way that you described it, where you're like, it was like, a maintenance expense. And what I use often is I look for people that don't see IT as a necessary evil, right? And so it's the same kind of style where you're like, I have to have it. It is what it is. It's playing in the background.
Cost of business.
Yeah, it's cost of doing business. But it is interesting to see how the organizations that really value IT, how those businesses thrive. They're very different, and they move like those like incremental improvements that a normal business will make as like they're going. It's like tenfold the improvement if there's someone that is actually valuing IT and investing in it. And investing doesn't need to mean that like you're spending a ton of money in IT or cybersecurity or whatever. It's that it's a strategic asset in your business. It's where you're using it for growth, and there's different things that you can do. So you don't have to spend a lot of money. You just have to spend it wisely on the things that are going to make the biggest improvements.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So
I would even say, I would challenge the industry as a whole that even the language we use to define the industry needs to change. Mm-hmm. Even the idea of an IT company. Yeah. Like the longer we continue that language, it's attached to a past story. Mm-hmm. I think there's an opportunity right now to emerge some new language to talk about what we're talking about right now.
Yeah.
Which
any ideas?
Certainly involves technology, but it's about how do we lift the condition of the entire system through technology, and how can we use technology to open up possibilities in how that organization thinks, how it processes information. I do a lot of work in deep research on the use of technology in the manufacturing world. And there's been some really interesting things going on in Japan where it's called autonomous things, meaning these are manufacturing operations that not only operate lights out, no human beings there at all, but the technology itself is able to adapt to surprise. So a leak in the roof, the technology itself will become aware of it and then will make its own remediation efforts on behalf of solving for that problem at the level of the whole system. And then you start connecting those autonomous systems to each other. Cool. Energy flow, all of these things where we're able to connect with intelligence, the energy source going into a manufacturing facility. Mm-hmm. And now that we can have much more out in the future predictive analytics, right? We've gotten to a point where we're finally getting to sort of real-time understanding of the intelligence of what's going on inside of a manufacturing facility. But now we're moving past that to say, okay, based on forecasting, based on trends, based on supply chain, based on policy. I mean, look what happened during the pandemic. The entire supply chain in manufacturing, which was very fragile because it was efficiency first, completely broke to pieces for the lack of making sure that we had a resilient supply chain versus a highly efficient supply chain. Yeah. And so now we're able to have a better chance of understanding those things as it relates to even what's going on right now. We're having a whole shift in the supply chain as it relates to tariff activity and whatnot,
Yep.
well, then how is it that we can create more predictable understanding of how am I going to get the materials I need to produce what I'm producing?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that is one of the biggest things in leadership is to be able to spend your time thinking about things like that. Or one of the concepts that I had a really great conversation with one of my close friends about is digital twinning, where they're using that a lot on manufacturing and production floors, where they're saying like, hey, I can go and spin up our entire environment in this conceptual world and say if I move certain things around, that's going to allow me to understand how I can gain efficiencies without actually having to like shift my entire real manufacturing floor.
Yeah.
And so I think having organizations with leaders that are thinking that way rather than solving the problems that they have today, that is what really propels people from a leadership perspective.
Just to take the AI conversation a little bit further, the way I think about AI and its potential, I would equate it to sort of like what Starbucks did for coffee. So whether you politically aligned with Starbucks or not, one thing that they were successful in accomplishing was raising the tide for the quality of coffee that you can get pretty much anywhere in the world. If you remember the days before, like it was like total Russian roulette, what kind of quality of coffee you were going to get wherever you went.
Yep.
So materially raised it, which then provided a higher foundation in which to aspire higher. And you notice what's happened now that companies like that exist, where now what's given rise to these boutiques that have taken the expression of coffee even further. Mm-hmm. And so what if we think of AI that way as an accelerator that's sort of lifting the conversation that we would spend a lot of time with here, because it's able to take on that conversation so well, it sort of lifts the level of conversation so that leaders could be spending much more time up here, having the big conversations that we need to be having, and using the thing that we have that AI doesn't have, at least yet, is our imaginations to dream up things. Mm-hmm. And, going back to listening, it's important to recognize that, so listening is the foundation in which conversations exist. Without listening, there's no such thing as a conversation, just noise. Mm-hmm. Words being said, none of it being heard. When we start asking bigger questions, right, that's the place where we can actually use our imaginations to make up stories about what isn't yet true that could be. And interesting fact about that, the defining characteristic of the branch of animals that led to us in this room right now was our ability to make up stories that aren't yet true and corral lots of people around those stories to make them true. Mm-hmm. And if leaders are spending all their time fixing problems and addressing the current state and all those kinds of things, then we miss the chance to actually elevate the story to say, well, what if? Yeah. What if we could create a world that looked like this? What if we could enable these things in the world? What would need to be true to do so? And when we're after something, I mean, there's an amazing thing that happens to the human condition is the best of us shows up around engaging in the impossible, engaging in an endeavor bigger than ourselves. That's what draws the best of us out. And absent of those bold ideas and bold visions, then we're leaving part of us on the shelf, just busy spending our time with our to-do lists, getting through the day, instead of thinking about the things that we're doing in the spirit of creating a future that goes beyond what we've experienced today.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about your coaching and facilitating world, where obviously this, generative listening and more forward and future thinking, leadership style, is used. Where is there any frameworks or anything that you're teaching or telling people to utilize in a business to say like, hey, this is how you should run the business to be focused on future forward-looking things rather than, again, EOS has come up so many times and it's very problem solving. Like literally I can like just replay in my head everyone in our executive team just coming back like, what's the problem you're trying to solve? And it's like, but that has its place, but it also doesn't allow for future growth. And that's, I think, where, everyone wants to get to, but then they find themselves on that hamster wheel of, I have to continue to solve these problems before I can actually think about what's happening in the future.
Well, right there is one of those big assumptions that we make, which is that, well, once we get to X, then we can have the big conversation.
Yeah.
And that is, again, and then will we ever get to that time, right? We tell ourselves these little lies like, oh, once we get this new headcount, once we get this new software, once we hit this objective, then we can take a break. Do we? No, because there's something else that shows up in our lap that we didn't see coming. The point we're missing here is we're always creating future.
Yep.
Everything we do causes effect in the future. The question is, are we aware of that or not? And it's the difference between an accidental future, and an accidental future basically is a future that is a culmination of our reactions to what is. An intentional future is one where we are aiming toward or being drawn toward a thoughtful story. And so what that means is, no matter how mundane the thing is we're doing, we could be doing it with the future in mind. But because we're not having the conversation about the future until such time as we've accomplished a certain thing, then we're creating that accidental future, which is going to be whatever it is at the time, when even in the moment when there's a dumpster fire in the hallway, we could be thoughtful about how we extinguish that fire in a way that sets us up for the future, instead of just running toward it, putting it out, and flooding the entire building while we do so, and doing all this damage. That then, what does that do? Creates more problems to fix, draws our attention. One of the members of our Leadership Academy said this great thing, which is, when my hands are so full of reality, how can I think about possibility?
Wow.
And yet, thinking about possibility is the antidote to being able to put down some of the plates we're spinning in our reality.
Yeah, that's deep. I like that.
Well,
I like that.
Cheers.
Yeah, exactly. So I want to shift gears a little bit and talk specifically about like your background in speaking engagements, and you're traveling all over, speaking to audiences of varying sizes, and obviously we talked about the TEDx before, and I think that's something really cool that some people look at and say like, man, like how do I get there? How can I get myself to be able to be someone that could be featured like that? And so would love to know, like, one, talk to me about the TEDx side. How'd you get there, and what was that experience like? And then a follow-up question is, what prepared you for all the speaking engagements and things that you're doing now? Because I think in emerging leaders, that's one of like their biggest hang-ups, right? Is being afraid to, talk in front of a crowd, or, I can talk, but what am I going to talk about that people are going to listen to? And, those are all interesting things that I would love your perspective on.
There was often times someone will come up to me after giving a keynote or delivering a program and say, wow, you're really good at this. You're a natural. I'm like, oh, no.
Oh, no.
Oh, no. I'm in this room this way because I work my ass off.
Yep.
And so I remember I made a real commitment to, and again, being an entrepreneur, running an agency for 20 years, you were in front of rooms pretty often, but those are in the context of business. But it was important to me to really get comfortable addressing large groups of people. Yeah. And at the beginning, I would take anything I could get, do it for free, just to build the reps of what it's like to address 300 people, 1,000 people, whatever, in the room.
Sure.
And I'll never forget the first couple of goes at it. At the time, for example, social media was just coming up, and we had done some very pioneering things. So I got called in to talk about social media, which I thought was funny. And I remember the first couple of gigs, man, I was a nervous wreck. I was sweating profusely. I had like 1,000 slides, so much content, speaking so quickly, just like bam, 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 getting through it all. And it was a great experience to really understand. There's one thing to say some stuff. It's another thing to actually have it make a difference in the audience. And so over the course of, and it was a rigorous discipline. I took on both mastery of writing and mastery of speaking at the same time. And I made a 2-year rigorous commitment, entered into some programs, and just got as many reps as I could. And what happened, of course, is I got better at it. Sure. And people were really absorbing what I was saying. And then I started to realize I actually have something to say here. Not just these topics that are popular at the time, but I've got something to say. And then it became creating experiments to bring these ideas out into rooms of strangers to see how they landed and to play around with them. So I launched, actually, Fathom was famous for its SIP sessions, which ran for 10 years every single month. And they were experimental programs every single month, open to the public for free. They actually became one of the top events in Connecticut right before the pandemic hit. And those were all sort of petri dishes to experiment with some things. And then once you find that message, then it's all about, okay, how can I learn how to meet my audience where they are so that I can connect with them and then move them into a new way of thinking over time. And so many of the things I've learned, I'm actually, just to keep going, like I speak over 100 times every single year. I'm actually in a master's program right now to develop a keynote speech for 2026, which has already been booked for 2 major stages about actually creating a completely new paradigm around leadership. We're sort of exhausted the fruits of the vestiges of the 150-year-old narrative for leadership. It's time to bring into existence a new narrative. Yeah. And so my quest for next year is to really start to open up that possibility and really change people's thinking. I'll give you sort of the punchline on it. The traditional narrative of leadership is controller of circumstance and chief burden bearer, to what if leadership were about being a choreographer of possibility and a generator of potential, and that your job is to set the stage for your team to have the performance of their lifetime.
Yeah, I love that.
So that's what I'm at work at now. But all I can say, for anyone who's aspiring to speak, just figure out, even if it's at dinner, no matter what, just get the reps in. And then over time, you'll start to say, wow, I've got some interesting things to say. And I'll say this too, there's all kinds of head trash that comes along with public speaking, which is like, I don't have anything valuable to say, or this topic's been covered 1,000 times, or whatever it may be. It's important to remember that each one of us has a completely unique view of the world. Yeah. We are all uniquely created. And so your obvious is likely somebody else's profound. Mm-hmm. And I look at it this way, how many love songs are there?
I can't even tell you.
Who knows, right?
Yeah,
are we
so
even close to being done writing love songs?
No, definitely not.
So we all have something to say.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a practice of just getting comfortable addressing a group of people. Mm-hmm. And then it's about discovering, wow, I actually have something to say here.
Yeah.
And I always look at it as, if I can just reach one person, just one person, my job is done here.
Yeah. And I think just by walking through that, right? Like, us talking today about leadership being this idea generating rather than problem solving is something unique that we have not talked about on here. And I love the perspective because it just allows us to think from a different perspective and allows us to say, hey, we can fix problems over here, but we also need to make sure we're spending time on what's possible, what's still to come. So again, I love that perspective shift. And again, it's kind of impact one person. Well, for me, that was super helpful. And I think, our listeners will also see that is very helpful. As far as your speaking and the training on that, you mentioned you were in some programs and stuff like that. Is there anything in particular? I know one of the, where do I start? If you Google that, the answer is going to come back and say Toastmasters, right? And so it's that's a great place to go get some reps in, right? To go speak in front of people and get some feedback. But is there actual courses or programs or anything like that? Maybe even something that you're doing. I think it's helpful to say things that you did, and then also potentially things that you have in your own organization.
Yeah. A good place to always start is to listen to great speakers, and
Who inspires you?
oh gosh, there's so many. One of my favorite things, and the name's escaping me of who narrates this particular YouTube version. It's not James Earl Jones. It's I can't remember his name. Anyway, there's a narrated version of the Declaration of Independence, and there's a couple of things I really appreciate that. One is certainly the voice talent that reads it, but the Declaration of Independence is a very interesting body of work because we tend to live in our most comfortable with descriptive language. We have advanced, you and I could sit here and describe the nuances of what we're enjoying right now. Mm-hmm. If you ever listen to a sommelier, incredible vocabulary and sophistication to describe what is. Yeah. Descriptive language, we have very advanced language for. And descriptive language is wonderful to describe experiences we're having, to describe our past. As soon as we move into the future, we actually have to leverage different language, which is declarative language. Declarative language is about declaring a possibility that doesn't yet exist. If you listen to the Declaration of Independence, particularly the first 5-10 minutes of it, it's literally declaring a possibility that is so far from being true, and there it is as this powerful reference point to make a declaration about a possibility we have no evidence to support that it'll be successful, but we believe it will be, based on these fundamental principles that underbelly what became our democracy that we experience today. There were no details because we didn't have any. We hadn't that idea hadn't existed before, and yet that language declares a possibility which organized an entire country. So if you think about something like that, it's just. And of course, Martin Luther King, and one of the greatest speeches of all time. Take time listening, because again, what is he doing in that speech? He's certainly addressing what's true and the tragedy of what was true at the time. But the language that he was challenging us with and rallying us around a call to action was a possible future, quite different from the one that we were experiencing in his time. Yeah. Very, very, very powerful. And I'll say this too, and I've learned this more recently, there's a clear distinction between the how-to speaking, which is, I'm going to give a talk on how to do a thing, which is great and really important, and I do a lot of workshops on the how-to side. But then there's another conversation, which is a change thinking conversation, which is my job here is to change your thinking and convince you to think differently and to apply that thinking to see what happens, not necessarily at all about how to do anything. Simply start by changing your thinking. Yeah, interesting. And so those are two different programs that are offered within your organization and what you teach to leaders. So the work that we do has two key forms. On one hand, what we teach is programmatic, and we then work with organizations to equip their teams with advanced leadership and listening practices. And that becomes a catalyzing, literally culture-changing, future-changing elements of their organization. And then on the other side, our team facilitates organizations through these critical journeys, which tend to be around major change events. Those change events could be setting out for a next chapter that goes way beyond the one that they're in. They could be succession issues. They could be an acquisition or merger is happening. But these major transition points is where we come in, and then we work with our clients over the course of years to not just create the framework for that vision, but also to help them integrate those ideas into the behaviors of the organization over time. And the results are incredible. I'll share just a brief story of one that we're particularly proud of that's happening right now. One of the most complicated municipalities, government agencies in the country brought us in about 2 years ago. And they had been sort of at a level of flat performance for a quarter century, really. And no matter what they tried, no matter how they brought different leaders and all these kinds of things, nothing made the difference. And so what we did is we taught them to listen beyond what they were listening. They were listening for how it was, how it's been, this is how we do things, follow the procedures. It was about listening to protect the assets that you have. So everyone was defensive. All little fiefdoms were being created and they were lobbing grenades at each other and all this kind of stuff was going on. And what we taught them fundamentally was, what if we listened beyond those things? What if we listened for what are the legacy things that we're doing that were created in a different time that if we broke would make room for something new? And actually the theme of the campaign that led this entire initiative was called Breaking New Ground, which was what they celebrated every week was how many things did you break? How many old systems that are in our way did you destroy in the spirit of creating a new way of doing things?
Yeah.
They went in 12 months from one of the most complained about and flattest performing parts of this huge organization to the most celebrated in the entire organization, and we 4x their performance in 12 months.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. And again, it's all about thinking about what's possible and what you can change.
Yeah.
Like that's...
And it starts with a change in thinking.
Yeah.
We tend to work thinking from the same place we've always done. We may use all kinds of new techniques, but we're using the old thinking. What if we changed our thinking and then acted from that new place? That's where everything changes.
Yeah. I love that. We just tied back in all the way back to the beginning of this conversation. So I love that. So as we move to the end of our episode here, you're speaking all across North America. What are some of the upcoming engagements that you're going to be speaking at that are most exciting to you, or things that you're excited to talk about or be a part of?
There's one, there's two major ones next year, but one I'll speak to. I have to leave the name out for now because it'll be a surprise to the audience. But it is a very exclusive conference where 75 leaders fly in from all over the world to spend 4 days at MIT getting access to cutting edge thinking. Cool. And I'll be one of the keynote addresses for that conference. It's a chance of a lifetime. I mean, these are some of the most influential people in the world will be in the room, and they're there to hear this idea about generative listening and this new paradigm around leadership. That happens next April, which I'm excited about. And then in between now and then, there's probably, I think, at least 100 events that I'll be speaking at in that time.
Wow.
So, yeah.
And so is most of that speaking specifically about generative listening?
It has become... Generative listening, for example, has become the highest rated and most popular program within one of the largest leadership organizations in the world. Much to my surprise, it was launched as an experiment at the end of the pandemic in 2021, and it quickly just accelerated to the point where I actually sunsetted my previous business, Fathom, to lift up a brand new company, Be Generative, which is just about a year old now. And have been working with my team so that they can deliver in these rooms to keep up with demand, which has been incredible. So there's 4 others out there in front of rooms spreading this message right now.
Wow, very cool, very cool. So again, appreciate all the time today. I loved the conversation. I think it was super impactful, and our listeners are definitely going to get a bunch out of this, and at least change the way that they're thinking on a day-to-day basis. But what I'd like to end with is a quick rapid fire round.
Sure.
I'll ask a couple quick questions and give me your thoughts on these. So
I'm gonna have a sip first.
Yeah, definitely prepare yourself. So first one is, if you could leave every leader with one question to break through, what would it be?
Ask your teams, if you had all the say around here, how would it be? Especially the voices that you don't normally hear. Leaders typically only get access to about 9% of what's really going on inside of their own organizations due to the complexity of a modern organization and so on and so forth. What if you made it a priority to be on an ongoing listening tour inside of your own organization and ask your team, if you had all the say, how would it be around here?
Love that. Okay. Next one is finish the sentence. True growth happens when
you're willing to set aside your convictions about what you know about the world and get curious again about the mystery of how little you actually know. And just be curious about the wonder of all the things that you have no idea about. And even meet people that you've known your whole life as if they were brand new to you.
Yeah. Start over again. I like that. Okay. And last one is, where can listeners connect with you, learn more about Be Generative's programs, and specifically follow you in the speaking engagements and things that you're doing?
2 ways. LinkedIn, Google, or just search Brent Robertson in LinkedIn, and you will certainly find me there. And then visit our website, which is be-generative.com.
Got it. Awesome. And I'll make sure that we have that tagged and in the show notes and all that stuff. So if anyone's looking to connect with you, that will have that there for you. But
Great.
Really appreciate all the time today. The drinks were awesome. The conversation was even better. Definitely appreciate you coming on the show.
Thanks for making space for this kind of dialogue. These conversations are really important.
Yeah.